Good morning, everyone. I'm Kim York, and I'm the Technical Analyst on the KDE Munis Support Team. Welcome to the annual PSD CSD webcast. In the background, we have Kristen Lambert, who is our team lead producing this event, and she will also be watching for any questions that you may have. If you do have any questions, please type them in the Q&A, which is a little comment balloon that you see at the top of your screen with a little question mark in it. We will also be stopping for questions between each of 3 sections of the presentation. We will start out with the EPSB ID import program. We'll start for questions after that. We'll continue on into the CSD portion and PSD, and we'll have questions in between each of those sections. And don't be scared that there are 66 slides. It is a lot of information, but we're not going to be going over all of that today. It's meant to be a tool for you to use along with the PSD and CSD guides. And do look at the state reporting guides at least annually, pull them off so that you can get the most recent information on state reports. So let's get started. So let's start with the EPSB ID import program. We started this EPSB ID import a few years ago, so many of you probably are really familiar with it, but we have a lot of new people, so this may be new to you. The EPSB ID import builds a file containing teacher EPSB license numbers for you to upload into Munis. It's going to look at the last 4 digits of the employee's social security number and their date of birth to match to pull that in. And the imports the associated EPSB ID into the state ID field on the employee master. So once you've imported this, you should see a number in the employee master screen under state ID. So I wanted to kind of give you a little grid. We're going to talk about each of these individually, but the EPSB ID import process begins with Infinite Campus. And there are 2 reports that you can pull from Infinite Campus. It's the validation report and the EPSB ID report. So you'll start out by pulling the validation report. From that report, you will make corrections. Once those corrections are made, you'll pull the EPSB ID report. You're going to save that report to your computer to then move to Munis and upload that EPSB ID file. You're going to check the error report that you'll receive when you import if you have errors. You'll make manual corrections in Munis, and then you'll be ready to run your PSD report and then watch for error number 50. And we're going to talk about each of these. So the validation report is pulled from Infinite Campus. It's the first report that you're going to pull. This is your steps in Infinite Campus to pull that report. In the campus toolbar, you can choose whether you want to pull a single school or all schools for your district. And you'll choose from that area, you'll choose the report type that you want to pull. You can choose the validation report, or you can choose the Munis upload file. So the validation report, it reports actively employed staff, and it's going to include those employees, whether they have an EPSB ID number or not. The column on the far right that you see, the export file, is going to indicate with an N or a Y, N meaning that no, they're not going to pull on the import file, Y that they will pull on the import file. And you can actually sort through any of those columns. It's an Excel document. The report actually highlights in yellow any area that information is missing from. So you can then go back and sort and enter that information so that your validation report is as accurate as possible, which will mean your Munis upload file is as accurate as possible. So corrections to the staff records must be made in Infinite Campus before you pull the EPSB upload file in order to have the most accurate information. And at the bottom, you'll see the KDE contact for Infinite Campus, because our Munis support team, or KDE Munis support team, does not work with Infinite Campus, but they have an employee, Crystal Darnell, who works in the Division of School Data Services. Her email is there, and that's who you would contact for any Infinite Campus or validation report issues going through this process. So this is what the EPSB ID import file looks like. You can see the last 4 of the social, the birth date, this information. It's produced from Infinite Campus. It is an Excel format, and this is the file to import to Munis. A lot of people get confused, and they'll save the validation report to their computer, and it's not the validation report that you're going to want to pull. You're going to want to pull the import file. So this is simply your file, your process to pull that file from Infinite Campus. And here are the steps that you're going to be choosing and going through. The EPSB numbers, this is the area I've highlighted, will import into the state ID field of the employee master. So that's where you're going to see it. There is not a field called EPSB ID number in employee master. You'll only see that number import into the state ID field. An EPSB ID appears in the EPSB ID field when the PSD CSD reports are generated. So this is different. When you're actually pulling the records for PSD and CSD, you have a field called EPSB ID, and that's where that number will pull to. Now you're going to hear this a couple of times throughout this presentation, and I just say it because it's important. The CSD report does not require an EPSB ID number, but some CSD employees do have EPSB ID numbers based on maybe jobs they had in the past that required an EPSB ID number. So those may pull in, but the EPSB ID field is not required in CSD reporting, only PSD reporting. So errors that you're going to see through this process are two. Import file does not match an existing employee in Munis, or the duplicate last four of Social Security number and date of birth. The second one, the duplicate last four of Social Security number and date of birth, is something that I want to talk more in depth with as we go along, but these are the two errors that you're most likely, that you will see in this process. So this is kind of a little grid that is showing you these two errors and what they could mean and possible solutions. I want to start with the one at the bottom, actually, the duplicate last four of Social Security number and date of birth. There are two reasons that you could actually get this error. The first is that more than one employee exists in Munis with the same last four digits of Social Security number and date of birth. This is extremely, extremely rare. I've only seen it one time, and it was just simply an error in entering. Information was entered the same Social Security number, date of birth for two employees as they were putting information into Employee Master. So that's a real rarity. The second one is an employee in Munis has more than one master file. So we found that if someone had a Employee Master and a terminated Employee Master, they had both Employee Master screens in Munis, you would get this error. We have had a fix that should keep that from happening. You shouldn't see this error if you have someone who has an Employee Master and a terminated Employee Master, but I'm just leaving it in there for now until we know for sure that that's 100% across the board fixed. The first one, import file does not match an existing employee in Munis. Bottom line, the last four digits of the Social Security number does not match the last four digits of the Social Security number in Munis. So an employee could have the last four in Infinite Campus or the last four in Munis be incorrect. You just want to go in and make the change wherever it's needed. If the last four are wrong in Infinite Campus, correct it there. If it's in Munis, date of birth the same way. It could be wrong in either Infinite Campus or Munis. You just want to correct whichever is incorrect. And the employee may not exist in Munis. So Infinite Campus has employees in it, such as area technology teachers, that exist in Infinite Campus for scheduling reasons, but they aren't in Munis. So you'll just disregard those. So reading these reports, so when you're actually looking at the EPSB ID import proof and you're looking at the actual report, you'll see that you don't have names. So you've got to figure out how, when you get an error, you know, what employee are we looking at? Who has the incorrect information? And you'll simply, if you look at the red arrows, you'll see that on the ID import proof, it's record 4. If you match that up with the actual import file, you will see that 4 is last 4 digits 3333. So you would simply go to Munis, do a search for, and last 4 digits of the Social Security number, the birth date. That should give you the employee that's having the error message. So to enter missing EPSB ID numbers, so you'll want to search and look for those that are missing, and you'll simply search with the EPSB ID as less than 0. That's going to pull up any files that do not have EPSB ID numbers, and you'll want to manually enter those and then regenerate the PSD report. Your PSD report will not submit if those EPSB ID numbers are missing. We also get the question, what if I have an employee who has applied for an EPSB ID number, but we don't have it yet, and we need to include that person on the report? You can use a series of 9 nines in that EPSB ID field. It's a series of 9 nines, but do remember that don't just put that in for anyone. It's only for people that have an application on file, because it will be checked. If they check and that employee does not have an application on file, the whole report's going to come back to you. It also follows through with lead reporting as well. So error code 50. This will be the last error code that you should get. This is upon doing your PSD report itself. It will say no EPSB ID number required for PSD recording. So each employee on the PSD report is required to have a number, or you cannot submit your report. So utilize that validation report that you get from Infinite Campus. Make sure all the information's there. The more accurate that validation report is in Infinite Campus, the more accurate your report's going to be in Munis as well. So a little FAQ on why we do this EPSB ID import process. Why is it necessary? So the PSD and CSD files now include EPSB ID license numbers. Now remember, they're not required on CSD, only PSD, but some could import to CSD. This allows KDE to minimize the use of staff social security numbers. So we're trying to really watch our employees' private information and trying to keep the social security numbers away from any place that it's not absolutely necessary. So the next issue is our district did not enter EPSB ID numbers for our staff, but many of them have one already. How are these entered? So for many years, several years, KDE has imported staff EPSB ID numbers into Infinite Campus. They were matched as carefully as they could, matching social security numbers, date of births, and names. And if that matched, those numbers were put there. So you were receiving them without having to do any research. But if you have someone who does not have a number, you need to get that number and get it on the file. So are EPSB numbers required for classified staff? I told you you're going to hear this several times because I get this question a lot. No, classified staff who report on the CSD file are not required to have an EPSB ID number, but they may have one. It's just not required. We'll stop here for a minute to see if we have any questions regarding the EPSB ID import process. And if you have any, please feel free to type them in the Q&A. We'll give you just a minute or two because it is a little delayed, and see if you have any questions. Also, if you don't have questions now, but you maybe have them later, this munis@education.ky.gov is our team shared box. I'll be giving you that email address several times throughout the presentation and at the very end. That is the box for Kristen Lambert, myself, and Krista Roche, who is our Tyler representative. And it's really great to use that box because if one of us may happen to be out of the office or in a meeting, the other person or other persons will see those questions and be able to get to you as soon as possible. So, Kristen, do we have anything? I'm not seeing any questions.
No, we don't have anything. The only question we've had thus far is if we've started, and yes, we've started, and I can see the stream live. It looks like we have over 100 people out there watching, so thanks everybody for attending.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's move on to the CSD portion. So this next section will be CSD and PSD. We'll cover CSD first. And an overview of the CSD report. This report produces an electronic file of classified employee information. It's required to be submitted to KDE no later than October 1st, and it's produced using Employee Master, Employee Job Salary, and Job Class Master records. The criteria for someone to actually generate into this report is that they have a summary class code that falls between 7000 and 7999. They have a group unit of containing CLAS or RCLA, and that they are hired as of September 15th of the fiscal year. So we're going to start out with allocation codes. Allocation seems to be the area where we have the most problems, the most error messages, the most questions, and it can read really simple. We're going to go over this. I actually have a grid that you can look at that will hopefully be a good tool for you to use during this process. But we'll start out with an employee who performs a single job but at several locations. So they will have multiple CSD records due to the allocation code set up on job salary. So obviously, if they're at 4 different locations, there's going to be 4 different org codes, 4 different GL strings. So they're going to have 4 different CSD records. So the example that we're going to look at is an instructional assistant who works equally at 4 elementary schools. There will be 4 CSD records for base pay. The FTE, and when we're looking at only allocations alone, the FTE will be 1 on each record, and they'll have an allocation of 25. If the contract is for 186 days, the contract days reported will be 46.50 because times 4, that reaches the 186 days. The base pay records for this is a single job class code, will always equal 100 for the allocation, and the days will always add up to the standard contract. The FTE percent is to be 1 for all records. The annual salary, reference salary, and days are prorated by the allocation percentage. So remember, allocation and FTE are 2 completely different things. They work together, but they're completely different things. So now we're talking about allocation. So in this instance, we have Betsy. Betsy is an instructional assistant. She's going to follow this format that we just went over. She has 186 contract days, and she's divided between 4 schools. So her allocation is divided between 4 CSD records. At school 1, allocation is 25, and that is the same for school 2, 3, and 4. The FTE will be 1 on each record for each of the 4 schools, but her days will also be in that calculation of 25% of the calculated 186 days. So each day on the CSD record will be 46.5%, or 46.5 days rather. Now we're going to talk about FTE, and this is different. So we're going to look at an employee who performs multiple jobs. They will have multiple pay records with an FTE of less than 1 on each record. Apologize, I had to grab a drink of water. Employee is an instructional assistant half-time and a supply service aide half-time. Each position or job class code will have an FTE of 0.50. So it's half in one job and half in another. If the same, because you can't work more than 1 full-time position. So if you're doing different things, it's just a percentage of your 1 full-time equivalent. So if the same employee was an instructional assistant at 2 different schools, the instructional assistant position would have an FTE of 0.50, but also an allocation of 50% for each location. I'm going to show you a grid for this. So first, we're going to look at 2 job class codes in only 1 location. So we have Bradley. Bradley is an instructional assistant and a supply service aide. He's going to have 1 CSD record with 0.50 FTE and the second at 0.50 FTE. Together, that's going to create Bradley's 1 full-time equivalent. So now Bradley has 2 job class codes, and at one of these job class codes, he has 2 locations. So he is an instructional assistant and a supply service aide, as we saw on the previous screen, which equals 1 FTE. But Bradley, where he's an instructional assistant, he works at 2 locations. So his allocation for that is going to be broken down 50% at John Doe Elementary and 50% at Mary Doe Elementary. So this is kind of an instance where you're going to see that allocation and FTE work together, but they are 2 different things. So now we're going to talk about hybrid employees. You're going to see a note at the end of your report that says check the setup of hybrid employees. You're going to see that with both CSD and PSD. This is a reminder for you to verify employees who are serving in a classified position but paying into TRS and are included on the CSD report. So something to remember, I always get, well, they need to be on the PSD report because they pay into TRS. The retirement that they pay into has no bearing on whether or not they're on the CSD report or the PSD report. What matters is whether or not their job requires, their job description requires that they have an EPSB ID number. If they're required to have that EPSB ID number, they're going to fall on the PSD report. But simply paying into TRS is not why they would be included on the PSD report. So some examples include your FRISKY directors, your CCLC directors, finance officers, and your school nurse. So as I said at the bottom again, only employees who serve in a position requiring a teaching certificate with an EPSB ID number will be reported on the PSD file. And this is simply your path to generating the CSD report, the screen that you will see. And if you need to manually update a CSD record, you can do this by updating the employee record on the CSD screen. You'll simply select search, enter that desired criteria to locate the employee and select accept. Select update to make your changes and accept to save them. But this note you're going to see at the bottom of many of the screens, it tells you you're highly encouraged to go back to employee master or employee job salary and make these changes there. If you don't make them in employee master, employee job salary at the time that you come across these changes, it's not going to be there for next year. You're going to be repeating the process over again. And this information is also needed on several state and national reports. So you want to make sure that it is correct in employee master and employee job salary. You can add a CSD record here. It's kind of the same process, but you need to make sure that they have an employee master record. Without an employee master record, you cannot manually add a CSD record. So creating the electronic file, you're going to open the CSD records that have been reviewed and edited, because a file must be created for submission to KDE. You'll find those records and then select electronic file. A CSD file will be created. You'll want to make note of the file name at the bottom of the screen because you'll need that later for submission. So submitting the electronic file to KDE, again, it needs to be submitted by October 1st, and it is submitted through the Seek Data web submission, which we're going to talk about later. If you do need a replacement file, you will need to email the finance.reports@education.ky.gov so that the first file can be denied before a second file can be resubmitted. So you're going to see this next couple of slides are just a grid of the most common CSD report errors. These are something that you can actually print out. Maybe they're the most common. All of the errors are in the CSD guide. So I always say pull those guides, but the most common ones are in this grid. I thought it might be good just to have those right at your fingertips. And this is a grid for you to pull off, but we're going to kind of talk about each one of them. So the most common is error 6.50, which is an invalid object code on the CSD record. The problem here is that you have an object code on a CLAS or Group BU. Summary class code in the 7,000 range does not contain the appropriate object codes. Valid object codes for CSD reporting are 0130, 131, and 0160, which is typically your school nurses. You'll see the grid there that has the classified summary class codes of 7,000 to 7,999. Those are controlled by KDE and cannot be changed. You can link a specific job class code for your district to those summary class codes using the range of 8,000 to 8,999 and object codes 0130, 31, and 0160. This grid and the grid for certified as well are in the CSD and PSD guides for you to reference. So error 11, which is no race selected, that's what it's going to come up, but it can mean different things. The problem here is that no race selections have been made on the employee master record, and they have not been selected or selected incorrectly. So if no, not Hispanic or Latino is selected in the ethnicity field, a race must be selected in the actual race area. So race, you may not choose 2 or more races. And this has been something that we've been discussing for the last year or so. Questions about this can be directed to the Division of District Support. You have the email address there. Bottom line, there is a national organization that this report goes to that does not recognize the field 2 or more races. They want you to actually mark what those races are. So that's kind of out of our hands. And so again, for questions about that, just reach out to the Division of District Support. If you do choose yes, Hispanic in ethnicity, you do not choose anything under race. So those are kind of the guidelines that you'll follow and what will be incorrect if you get CSD error 11. So error 16 is an invalid summary class code. A summary class code outside the list of valid KDE codes exists on the pay record. To correct this, you'll update the job class master with a valid summary class code. And there is a guide out there on the KDE Munis site called Employee Classification Codes, PR Admin 5. You can refer to that for any of these codes, and the link is actually in the presentation as well. 1610, no summary class code defined. The problem here is that the job class code associated with the employee's pay doesn't contain a summary class code. To correct that, go to Job Class Master, enter the correct code, and again, that same guide will have a list of allowable classification codes. Error 26 was the invalid BU job class and object code, which is just basically saying the combination of your group BU, your job class and object code is not meshing well. It's not working. So you'll see there by the check mark, valid combinations would be class or RCLA, a summary class code between 7,000 and 7,999, and object codes 0130, 131, and 0160. So if you get error code 26, go back and just look at that combination, make sure that everything works as it's supposed to. If not, you'll just simply need to update it and change that information. Error code 35, and this is what we always call the crazy calculation. We get a lot of districts who have issues with this one, and it's basically the hours times the contract days times the rate of pay, and then you minus the annual salary, and it's got to be within KDE parameters, which is plus or minus $25. So if you get error code 35, go back to this calculation, look at those screens and see what may be out and simply make those corrections. So the most common CSD report warnings is basically 124, which is the finance officer is not reported for the district, and it's looking for summary class code 7166, 84, 85, or 86, and object code 0130. And again, the group is classified. It could be that your finance officer requires an EPSB ID number, and they're going to report on PSD. So that's why this is a warning. You just want to make sure that your finance officer is reported on either the PSD or the CSD report. You can still submit with that warning. So we'll stop again to see if we have any questions regarding the CSD reporting. Kristen, do we have anything?
Nothing on CSD, but we did have a follow-up question about Social Security, or the EPSB number, and they're asking could they use the nines, a series of nines on more than one person. And
yes,
yes, and I just encourage that it should only be used really for those employees that are still waiting on their EPSB number from that organization. So.
Absolutely. If when it gets to the Division of District Support, and if the series of nines is checked to make sure that an application has been filed, if there is no application filed, the entire report comes back to the district. So, and they would have to actually research, find that EPSB ID number if it exists, or if it doesn't. Something's going to have to be done as to whether or not that employee remains on that report. I haven't seen that. I think most districts have been pretty honest about using it for only employees that have been that have an application on file.
So that was, oh wait, let's see, there's one new one. Do we have to wait until after September 15th to submit these reports?
You cannot submit, and they have to actually open this up for submission on September 15th. That does not mean that you cannot be working on any of these files. You can go ahead and get them ready to go, but the submission should open with that Seek submission website on September 15th. They want to make sure that if you employ, you hire an employee on September 14th, that they're included. So you can begin working on this process now to see where your errors are and start getting those corrected and be ready for that September 15th date. I highly encourage that, actually. Okay.
That's all we have for now.
Okay, let's move on to PSD. So an overview of the PSD report, which is a professional staff data, it produces an electronic file containing certified employee salary information, again to be submitted no later than October 1st. The PSD report uses data from the Employee Master File, Employee Job Salary Records for employees as of September 15th. So requirements for an employee to pull on the PSD file is that their employee status on Employee Master is active. Employee pay records must contain valid summary class codes 0010 to 3999 and or 5000 to 5999. Employee job salary records must have a group BU of CERT or RCER. And remember, these reports go beyond PSD and CSD. They are used for federal reports, state reports, and there are also reports that go to state legislators. So it's really important that this information is as accurate as possible. So salary tables. Your base pay salary tables will be submitted for comparison to the actual PSD files. And we're going to talk about this later, maybe even here, but your salary table must be submitted first before you can submit your PSD file. That salary table has to be in place and submitted to be able to compare to the PSD to make sure that everything is matching up as it should. So the tables will be used to verify each employee's base and extended day reference salary and that it corresponds to the salary tables. The salary tables must contain at least 40 steps for each grade rank, and each table must contain the same number of steps. And the naming scheme for the salary tables must conform to KDE requirements for certified base pay. So retirees are an area that I get questions from many districts every year, and hopefully this grid will help you with these 4 items regarding retirees. The first one is that we have retirees returning to work as a classified staff member. They should have a summary class code that falls in the 7,000 to 799 range. Retired employees that retired paying TRS return to work in a district in a classified position that requires a 4-year degree, so they will pay TRS. They are coded to RCLA, so they're in a classified group BU. Retired employees that retired paying TRS return to work in the district in a classified position that does not require a 4-year degree. They will pay into CERS and they'll be coded to CLAS group BU. Retired teachers hired back in a position requiring a teaching certificate will have a group BU of RCER, and this is really important. This 4th bullet is the one where we see the most error. So remember that if you hire a retired teacher back in a position requiring a teaching certificate, put them in the group BU of RCER. They should be pointed to a retired employee salary table, which is a negotiated rate with TRS for the maximum amounts that can be set. They should pull into the PSD report. However, and this is important because I get questions about this all the time, you will not see a grade or step. It will be blank on the PSD records when they are generated, because if you use RCER, KDE will not look at the reference salary to any salary table as long as you use that group BU of RCER. That 4th one, I think, is the one that most districts really need to look at closely. So extra service pay. A certified employee who received extra service must have a separate employee job salary record for each extra service job. Extra service job salary records must reflect a job class code linked to an allowable extra service summary class code, and those are in the range of 5,000 to 5,999. Certified employee job salary records for those employees who receive extra service pay have to contain the appropriate object code, which is 0112, 13, or 14. So we're kind of looking at the same information that we looked at with CSD with some slight differences. The FTE for a mid-year hire working in only one position. So you hire someone, they come in, they're working in one position, they come in mid-year. That's what we're looking at. A partial year employees will be updated in the PSD file with a full year of days employed when the file is generated. So it's important that the days employed remain at that full amount as if they worked an entire year. The days employed field must stay at the number of contract days the district has set for a full year of standard certified contract. Now, these two red areas are really important. The reference salary field must contain an amount reflective of a full year's salary as if employed for an entire year. And the annual salary will be the salary the employee will actually receive for the number of days he or she will work. The FTE field needs to reflect that percentage in order for this calculation to work correctly. So you'll see in this instance, they worked 170 of 187 days. So you divide the 170 by 187 and you get the 0.9091 FTE. And it's very important that those FTE percentages be at the 10,000th position, as you can see with the 0.9091. So employees, FTE employees working in multiple positions. Employees who work in more than one position should have multiple job salary records. Same thing as we saw with CSD. An example here is an employee is 50% high school classroom instructor and 50% media specialist. Each job salary record will be set up reflecting a portion of the total annual salary. Examples below, you'll see the two job salary records and the two PSD records, and those are good screenshots to reference if you have that position when pulling your PSD report. So here's a note: allocation codes can also be used in conjunction with FTE when needed. Employees who perform a single job but at several locations, or whose salary is split between various GL accounts, will have multiple PSD records due to the allocation code set up in job salary record. So it's the same here. If they have different GL strings, they're going to have multiple PSD records. The annual salary, reference salary, and days are prorated by the allocation percent. The second one here, error 27 and 2720, it tells us that these errors may print erroneously. If you have employees who are working in multiple positions, you want to review the employee's PSD records to verify that they are set up correctly. If the records are set up as discussed, you can disregard the error. No updates are necessary. So for those districts who have moved to, or I would say for all districts actually, if you're setting up separate job salary records, I know recently based on whether or not it's Fed funded or general fund, you're having to set up multiple job pay records. You're probably going to see more of this error 27 and 2720 than you have in the past. But just remember that as long as you're looking at these and they appear to be set up correctly to you, you can submit your report. But the caveat here is that Division of District Support, when your report is submitted, will also be looking at these. So even though you can submit with those errors, you definitely want to double check to make sure that they're correct, because the Division of District Support, when they receive these PSD reports, will also be looking at those errors 27 and 27 to make sure that they are set up correctly. So just because you have been able to submit it with the PSD process, you still have to undergo those errors that you can receive upon submission. So the grading step for employees having multiple job salary records should be the same. And again, with hybrid employees, you want to verify that the employees serving in a classified position but paying into TRS are set up with a group BU of CLAS and object code of 0130. So creating the salary table file. An electronic file of the Munis salary tables will be created for submission to KDE. The file will be submitted using the Seek Data Web Submission application. And in order for it to submit successfully to KDE, the tables must reflect the following. The naming structure must conform to KDE standards. You will see that in the PSD guide. The salary table file for the PSD submission must contain at least 40 years of data for each grade. And all tables must contain the same number of steps. Example, if rank 1 step 1 table contains 44 steps, then all tables must contain 44 steps. This is simply your path to actually creating that file or pulling up the PSD report. And note that when you go through this process, you select salary table. This is the screen you will see, and you'll want to notate that file name at the bottom because you'll need that upon submission. This is the path that you'll follow to the actual KYPSD report and the screen that you will see. So resolving PSD report errors. Errors can be resolved by correcting the job class master, employee master records, and/or employee job salary records. After the errors have been corrected, the recalc button can be selected to recalculate a single employee's PSD record. Multiple errors can exist to a single problem on an employee's record. For example, an employee record contains error 16. This may kick error 6, and so on. You can get one error, one thing to correct, but that one error may domino. It may just keep falling over, so you may see 5 or 6 errors for one employee, but actually correcting one thing may correct all of them. So manually updating your PSD records. Again, some errors can be resolved by updating the employee PSD records. However, it's only going to be accurate for the current reporting process. So anytime that you are updating information, through errors and they need to be changed in the employee job salary or employee master, go ahead and go back and do that. You want that information to be as correct as possible. The same thing with adding. This is simply your steps for adding a PSD record, just like we went through with adding a CSD record. And the electronic file itself. So this is the steps that you will take for your electronic file. It says the electronic file must be created after the PSD records have been generated, reviewed, and edited. So you want to go through that whole process first. Then you'll choose the electronic file button on the PSD report screen. You'll want to make note of the electronic file path and name, or that you'll need that for submission, the name itself, that is. And submitting the electronic PSD file to KDE. Again, it needs to be submitted by October 1st, and you're using the Seek Data Web Submission application. And in red here, we note what I've mentioned earlier, the salary table file must be submitted prior to submitting the PSD file. And if you need to submit a replacement file, again, email finance.reports@education.ky.gov. Let them know that the first file needs to be denied and that you're going to be submitting a second file. So here's the grid with the most common PSD report errors. Again, this is just something to print off for you to have and maybe keep at your fingertips as the most common, but all errors are in the PSD guide itself. And we'll discuss a few of these. The most common is PSD error code 6. And this is one that we mentioned earlier. You can have, if this one is incorrect, you may have 3 or 4 other errors that pop up because of it. And the problem here is that this error test checks to ensure there is a base pay record object 0110 for all employees in the PSD report. To correct this, check to make sure there is an object code 0110 record for all certified employees. The note here is that there is an exception in this for ESS teachers. It is allowable for them to have a single 0113 object code record to projects 120X or 124X for an employee. So 6.50, invalid object code for PSD records. This is just checking to ensure the PSD report contains valid certified expenditure object codes, which are 0110, 11, 12, 13, and 14. You want to check to make sure the object code is a valid certified payroll object code. So inaccurate summary class code for object code. This is error code 26. This error test verifies the summary class codes coordinate with the valid object codes. Summary class codes are set and maintained by KDE. So remember, summary class codes cannot change. You have to adhere to the KDE list. The range for summary class codes along with the allowable object codes are below. So you're seeing the summary class codes of 0010 to 3999. The object codes with that is 0110 and 0111, and that just kind of follows through with the grid. Below are the number ranges to be used when a district wants to add a new job class code. So remember, job class codes are set up by your district. They are tied back to a summary class code. And so along with the allowable object codes for each group, here we see 4000 to 4999. You use 1011 and you just follow that grid through. So these are just really good little pieces of information to have at your fingertips should you receive these errors, and especially error code 26. Error code 44, yes, your district has to have a kindergarten instructor. So this error verifies that your district does have a kindergarten instructor with a summary class code of 2025. The error will state the district has no kindergarten teachers coded. 2720, check the reference salary by the FTE minus the annual salary. So this is another one of those errors that when you get in PSD, you may want to check that reference salary by the FTE minus the annual salary to see that everything comes within the KDE guidelines. Again, here it's plus or minus 25. And here are some warnings that you might actually receive on the PSD report. Again, you can submit with warnings, but you want to make sure that you have these things in place. So warning 22 is that you have a media specialist that it's not reported for the school. You want to make sure that you have that. 23, a DPP not reported. You need a DPP reported with summary class code 0080. Warning 29 is no superintendent reported for district summary class 0110. You know, it may be that your superintendent, if it's vacant, you don't have to report it, but just verifying that you do have a superintendent reported with summary class code 0010 is important. And 124, this is the one we discussed in CSD, finance officer not reported. As long as they're reported on one or the other, CSD or PSD, that will be fine. So questions on state reporting. So beyond our PSD and CSD annual reporting, we have a shared team email box for any questions that are state reporting involved, or questions maybe you don't know who to reach out to. We can help you with that as well. But reporting, you know, is actually sending emails to our team email box will ensure the most timely response. We respond absolutely as quickly as possible. And the email is munis@education.ky.gov. So Kristen, do we have any other questions or?
We did receive one question, but we'll follow up with that district after the webcast. Other than that, nothing else new has come in.
Please feel free. We'll give it a couple of minutes because I know that these questions can be delayed. If you have any questions on any aspect of this, you know, feel free to ask now. If we finish this webcast and you realize that you have a question later, email our box. We're happy to help.
Well, Kim, nothing new. Do you want to?
Your crickets. I don't think anyone has any questions.
If they do, we have our box that they can email
Absolutely.
us afterwards. So
Absolutely.
Thanks everyone for watching. Kim did an awesome job. She knows everything there is to know about this reporting. So.
Well, I appreciate that, Kristen, and I do thank everyone for tuning in. Again, we're here to answer any questions that you have outside of PSD, CSD, anything state reporting. Just email us. We're happy to help in any way that we can. Use the Munis guides, and again, pull the most recent, at least pull them annually, especially as we're upgrading to 2019. There's going to be notes and additions, things that you're going to want to see. So pull the most recent guides when you're doing especially annual state reporting. But yeah, thanks everyone, and y'all have a great day, great weekend.